Clara Ashford snatched the foreclosure notice off the relay station wall, walked straight across the street to the hotel, pushed open the door to room 7 without knocking, and threw the paper directly into Marcus Hale's face. "You forged the registration date," she said. "The recorder's log has no entry for March 14th, 1873. Not one. You picked a date and you typed it and you filed it, and you have been standing in this town watching families lose everything they built because not one person here knew how to read what you actually did." She pulled out the documents. "I do. Before we go any further, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story travels. And if you're new here, please subscribe and follow this channel so you don't miss a single word of what happens next." Now let's go back to the afternoon. It all began, and understand exactly what kind of woman walked off that stage. The Butterfield stage rolled into Redemption, New Mexico territory on a Tuesday in late October, and Clara Ashford was the last one off. Not because she was slow, because she had spent the final 20 minutes of the journey reading the same telegram for the 11th time, and she needed those last seconds before her boots hit the ground to decide what kind of woman she was going to be now that the plan was gone. The telegram was brief. It read, "Arrangements have been reconsidered. Contract void. Whitfield. 9 words. 6 weeks of humiliation. 240 miles of travel, and 9 words." She folded the paper, put it in her satchel next to her father's account. Ledgers stepped off the stage and looked at Redemption, New Mexico territory, which was not Santa Fe, which was not where Douglas Whitfield was waiting, which was not anywhere she had intended to be. "Ma'am," the driver handed down her bag. "Next stage north runs in 4 days. Relay station can tell you about lodging." "Thank you," Clara said. She did not cry. She had cried exactly once since her uncle had handed her the fraudulent transfer documents 4 months ago, one night alone in a boarding house in Philadelphia, face pressed into a pillow so the other residents wouldn't hear. She had decided that was sufficient. The relay station smelled of leather and tobacco and old paper. A broad man with a sun-damaged neck sat behind a desk covered in ledgers and loose manifests, squinting at a column of figures with the expression of someone losing a fight he didn't understand. Clara set her bag down, looked at the open ledger from across the room, and saw the error in approximately 4 seconds. "Excuse me," she said. The man looked up. "Help you, miss? Your freight conversion. You're calculating incoming weight at 14 pounds per cubic foot. The territorial standard is 12. She pointed at the column without touching the book. "You've been overcharging yourself on every inbound shipment since at least." She tilted her head, reading further down, August. The man stared at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who needs a room for 4 days and is willing to work for it." She met his eyes. "My name is Clara Ashford. I managed transit accounts in Philadelphia for 4 years. Your records have at minimum 3 months of compounding errors in them, and if you'd like to know exactly how much money that represents, I can tell you by tomorrow morning." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at his ledger, then back at her. 50 cents a day, he said. It was an insult. She took it. "I'll need full access to the freight manifests going back to January," she said. "Back room," he said. "Don't touch the cash box." His name was Gibbs. He had been running the relay station for 11 years and had apparently never once questioned why his numbers never quite balanced. Clara spent 2 hours in the back room with his records and found 4 separate categories of error. 2 of them, honest miscalculation, and 2 of them, something else entirely, systematic adjustments to outgoing freight weights that consistently benefited one particular shipping contractor. She was still working when the door opened without a knock. The woman who entered was somewhere past 55, gray-streaked hair, dark, practical dress, carrying a covered plate, and moving like someone who had long ago decided that the world could either get out of her way or get run over. She set the plate on the corner of the table without asking. "Ruth McAllister," she said. "Boarding house on 2nd Street. Gibbs sent word." "I have money for a room," Clara said. "Some of it anyway. Ruth sat down across from her with the unhurried confidence of someone who had nowhere more important to be and knew it. "You've been in that satchel 3 times since you sat down. Account ledgers by the look of them. Personal ones, not Gibbs's." Clara looked up. "I was a field nurse for 2 years during the war," Ruth said. "I learned to read people the way you apparently read numbers. Quickly and without much margin for error." She paused. "You're not a mail-order bride who got stranded. You're something else entirely." "I was a mail-order bride who got stranded," Clara said. "I'm also an accountant. Both things are true." "What happened?" "The man in Santa Fe voided the contract before I arrived. And before that..." Clara was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through Redemption's main street. Someone was arguing in Spanish 2 buildings over. A horse stamped and blew. "My father owned a transport company in Philadelphia," she said finally. "He died in June. My uncle presented documentation claiming the company transfer contained a recording error that gave him full ownership. By the time I identified the discrepancy in the documents, he had already filed in court." She kept her voice flat and factual. "The matrimonial agency was not my first choice. It was my last one." Ruth looked at her steadily. "Could you prove the documents were forged?" "Yes. But proof requires someone willing to look at it, and the judge my uncle filed with had taken dinner at his house 3 times in the past year." Clara picked up her pencil. "I chose to leave instead of spend 2 years fighting a case I would lose regardless of the evidence. That took more intelligence than most people would credit. It didn't feel intelligent. It felt like losing." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and placed a folded set of papers on the table between them. "Then I need you to look at something," she said. Clara looked at the papers without touching them. "What is this?" "A land claim filing. Continental Railroad land agent named Marcus Hale has been in Redemption for 6 weeks. He's filed challenges against 4 ranching properties claiming their original territorial grants contain recording errors that void ownership." Ruth's voice was even and precise. 3 families have already signed away grazing rights they didn't understand they were signing. 1 more is close to breaking. Clara picked up the papers and started reading. "The largest holding is Copper Ridge Ranch," Ruth continued. 8 miles north. Owner named Seth Calloway. He's been fighting Hale's claim for 3 weeks, 1,200 acres. How long has Calloway held the land? Since 1871. Bought it himself. Spent 11 years building it. Clara turned to the second page. Her eyes stopped. She went back, read the section again. "This registration date," she said. "What about it?" "March 14th, 1873. Clara set the page down and looked at Ruth. "Do you have access to the territorial recorder's log for that period?" Ruth reached back into her pocket and produced a second set of papers. "I made a copy when I was in Santa Fe last spring on other business. Didn't know why I might need it. Kept it anyway." Clara took the recorder's log found March 1873 and ran her finger down the entries. March 7th. March 12th. March 21st. No March 14th. Not a gap. Not an illegible entry. Simply no filing from this district on that date, as though the date itself had been invented by someone who had not thought to check whether the official record would support it. "The registration Hale is using as the basis for his challenge," Clara said, "was not recorded on the date these documents claim it was recorded." Ruth's eyes were very still. "You're certain?" "The recorder's log has no entry for March 14th from this district. Hale's registration document says it was filed March 14th. Either the official territorial record contains an error or this document was backdated." Clara looked up. "It is almost never the official record that contains the error." "Can you prove that in court? In front of a judge who hasn't been to dinner at Hale's house?" "Yes." The sound of boots on the plank floor outside came fast and deliberate, and the door opened before Ruth had a chance to say anything else. The man who stepped in was tall, lean through the shoulders, dark hair, dark eyes that went immediately to the papers spread across the table. He was somewhere in his mid-30s and looked like someone who had not slept properly in weeks, not from laziness but from carrying something too heavy to put down long enough to rest. He stopped when he saw Clara. "Mrs. McAllister." His voice was low and controlled in the way of someone keeping it that way by conscious effort. "Gibbs said you were back here." "Mr. Calloway." Ruth's voice was entirely unsurprised. "This is Clara Ashford. She arrived on the afternoon stage. She's been reviewing Hale's filing for the past half hour." Calloway looked at Clara. Not with suspicion, and not with the particular brand of dismissal she had encountered from most men when she sat down at a desk. He looked at her the way she imagined she looked at a set of numbers that didn't yet make sense carefully, and without assuming he already knew the answer. "Well," he said. "Sit down," Clara said. He sat. She turned the recorder's log toward him and placed Hale's registration document beside it. The filing date on Hale's registration is March 14, 1873. The official territorial recorder's log has no entry from this district on that date. The next filing is March 21st. It has nothing to do with your land. Calloway looked at the two documents side by side. His jaw tightened slowly, the way metal tightens when temperature drops. "Say that plainly," he said. "The document Hale is using to challenge your ownership was not recorded when it says it was recorded. Someone created a registration date that does not appear in the official record. You're saying it's fake." "I'm saying it contains a discrepancy that cannot be explained by honest error, and that discrepancy benefits Marcus Hale's client by approximately the value of 1,200 acres of New Mexico grazing land." Clara kept her voice precise. "What a court calls it depends on what else we can prove." "What else is there to prove?" "If this registration was backdated, someone in the Territorial Land Office either created the filing without logging it or logged it and subsequently removed the entry. Either way, there is a human being with a name who made that choice, and human beings who make choices like that rarely do it once." She looked at him directly. "I would want to know if any of the other challenged properties in this territory show the same pattern." Calloway was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clara could hear it against the station walls. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "I'm doing my job. Gibbs hired me to audit his records." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Clara looked at him for a moment. He had the directness of a man who had spent 11 years talking to horses and cattle and open sky and had lost patience for conversational indirection somewhere along the way. She found she didn't mind it. "4 months ago," she said, "my uncle handed me documentation claiming my father's company transfer had errors in it. The documents looked legitimate to everyone who reviewed them. They were not legitimate. By the time I proved that it didn't matter, because the people who should have stopped it had already decided not to." She looked down at the recorder's log. "I know what this is, Mr. Calloway. I know exactly what this is, and I find I am constitutionally unable to sit in a room with evidence of it and choose to look elsewhere." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something true has been said, and both people in the room know it. "Reckon you've had a considerable year," Calloway said. "I've had a clarifying year," Clara said. "There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy, something more level than sympathy, more like recognition. "What do you need," he said, "to build a proper challenge?" "The physical original of your 1871 land grant. The territorial recorder's log for 1872 through 1874, not a copy. Someone needs to be present when it's pulled from the Santa Fe office to ensure the correct volume is provided. And any other properties Hale has challenged in this territory, I want their filing dates cross-referenced against the same log." "I've got the grant at the ranch." "Then Santa Fe is the critical piece." Clara looked at him. Whoever goes cannot simply request a copy by mail. Given that Hale has already demonstrated willingness to manipulate official documentation, a mail request leaves too many points of failure. "You're saying somebody needs to go there in person and stand over the clerk's shoulder while they pull the record." I'm saying someone who can read what they're looking at needs to be in that room. Calloway looked at her steadily. Stage doesn't run for 4 days. I'm aware. And after that, you were planning to go to Santa Fe anyway. He said it without inflection. Not manipulative, just noting the facts as they lay. I was planning to go to Santa Fe to meet a man who has since made clear he has no interest in meeting me, Clara said. The destination remains the same. The reason has changed considerably. This isn't your fight. No, Clara said. It isn't. She straightened the papers into a careful stack, aligned the edges, set the recorder's log on top. But I have spent 4 months watching people with resources and connections use forged documents to take things from people who don't know how to fight back. I am very tired of watching it. She met his eyes. I am also, as of this afternoon, in possession of exactly enough time and exactly the right skill set to be useful. In my experience, ignoring a convergence like that tends to result in regret. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll ride out to the ranch tonight and bring the grant back in the morning. I want you to look at it before we decide anything. That's sensible. He stood picking up his hat. He was at the door when he stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back. Miss Ashford? His voice carried something that wasn't gratitude exactly, but lived close to it. That document's been sitting in Marcus Hale's filing for 3 weeks. Every lawyer I brought it to said it was valid. Said I was wasting my time in theirs. A pause. You looked at it for 30 minutes. Numbers don't lie, Clara said. People do. The numbers were always there. Someone just needed to read them. He looked at her for one more moment with those careful winter sky eyes. Then he nodded, once settled his hat, and walked out. Ruth McAllister waited until his boots were gone from the plank floor. Then she said quietly, He built that ranch with money he saved working other people's land for 12 years. He has no family left. His brother died in a mine collapse 3 years ago, 22 years old. His sister is in Tucson raising 3 children alone. She picked up the empty plate. Copper Ridge Ranch is the only thing in the world that is entirely his. Clara looked at the recorder's log with the absent date. March 14th, 1873. A date someone had chosen because it was plausible and distant, and they had never imagined anyone would check. She thought about her father's office in Philadelphia. The big oak desk, the ledgers lined up by year, the smell of ink and dust, and the particular satisfaction of a column that balanced to the last cent. She thought about her uncle sitting in that chair now behind that desk, with documents she had identified as fraudulent, but could not prove in a court that had decided not to look. She thought about 1,200 acres and a man who had spent 11 years building the only thing in the world that was entirely his. Tell me everything you know about Marcus Hale, she said to Ruth. His methods, his contacts, his timeline, everything. Ruth sat back down. Outside, the October wind moved through Redemption streets. In the hotel on the far end of town, Marcus Hale sat with his forged papers and his confidence and his railroad money, entirely unaware that a woman who had been destroyed by exactly his methods had arrived on the afternoon stage, identified his critical error in 30 minutes, and was now sitting in the relay station back room with the territorial recorder's log and the focused patient fury of someone who had been waiting 4 months for a fight she could actually win. Clara Ashford had not come to Redemption looking for anything except 4 days and a stage north. What she found instead was a fraud. She recognized a rancher with everything to lose, and the specific convergence of skill and timing and righteous anger that her father had always called when he was alive before everything. The moment when a person finds out exactly what they are made of. She picked up her pencil. She got to work. Ruth talked for an hour and 20 minutes without once repeating herself, which told Clara that the woman had been holding this information for weeks, organized and ready, waiting for someone who could do something useful with it. Marcus Hale had arrived in Redemption on September 3rd, traveling alone with 2 trunks and a leather document case that he kept padlocked. He had taken the best room at the Continental Hotel, paid 2 weeks in advance in cash, and within 48 hours had introduced himself to the mayor, the sheriff, and the owner of the largest saloon on Main Street in that order. Ruth had observed that a man who understood a town always visited those three first. He was 43 years old, clean-shaven, pleasant-mannered, and dressed in the kind of suit that said, "Money without saying new money." He told people he was a land assessment agent, working on behalf of the Continental Railroad's Western Expansion Survey, which was true in the same way that a wolf wearing a dog's collar was technically wearing a collar. "He bought Sheriff Odom a horse," Ruth said. Clara looked up from the notes she was taking. "He bought the sheriff a horse. A good one. Bay mare, 16 hands, saddle included. Odom told people it was a gift from the railroad in appreciation for the town's hospitality." Ruth's voice was entirely without inflection. 2 weeks later, Hale filed his first land challenge against the Beaumont family. 40 acres of grazing land with a water source that the railroad needs for a planned depot. And Odom did nothing. Odom told Tom Beaumont that land disputes were civil matters outside his jurisdiction and suggested Tom hire a lawyer. Ruth paused. "The nearest lawyer willing to take the case is in Las Cruces, 60 miles south. Tom Beaumont cannot afford 60 miles. Clara wrote that down. Then she said, "What about Deputy Drummond?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. The quality of the quiet was specific. "Drummond has 3 children," Ruth said. "His wife had a long illness last winter. Medical bills." Another pause. "Hale paid those bills in January, 2 months before he arrived in Redemption." Clara set her pencil down. "He identified his targets before he came." "That is my reading, yes. He researched which families held the land he needed, which officials could be bought and for what price, and which recording gaps in the territorial system he could exploit." Clara stared at the papers in front of her. "This is not his first territory." "No," Ruth said. "I wrote to a woman I know in Flagstaff last month. She told me a land agent matching Hale's description worked the same pattern there 2 years ago. 4 properties challenged. 3 lost in court. The 4th family sold voluntarily rather than fight a case that was going nowhere." Ruth folded her hands on the table. "The family that sold got 40 cents on the dollar. The railroad put a depot on that land within 6 months." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had settled, and Redemption had gone to the particular stillness of a small town after 9 o'clock, when the saloons were the only buildings still lit, and everyone else had made their peace with the dark. "He's going to know someone is looking at the documents," she said. "Eventually, yes." "How long before he hears I've been asking questions?" Ruth considered this with honest precision. "In a town this size, 2 days if we're careful. 1 if we're not. Then we need to move faster than he expects anyone to move." Clara began organizing the papers into sequence. "The recorder's log is the foundation of everything. Without it, I have a discrepancy that a good lawyer can argue either way. With it, I have documented evidence that Hale's filing date does not exist in the official record. That is not arguable. That is arithmetic." "The stage to Santa Fe leaves Saturday morning," Ruth said. "Saturday morning." Clara nodded. "I need Calloway's original land grant before then. I need to know if the same pattern appears in the other challenged properties. And I need to understand exactly what Hale has filed in the territorial court, not just the local notices, the actual court submissions. The court submissions are public record. The territorial courthouse in Santa Fe would have copies. Which is another reason someone needs to be standing in that courthouse in person." Clara looked at Ruth steadily. "Can you get me the filing information for the other 3 challenged properties before tomorrow morning?" Ruth stood without hesitation. "I know where Hale posts his public notices. He's required to file them with the town recorder before he can proceed to court." She picked up her shawl from the back of the chair. "Give me an hour." She was gone before Clara could say thank you. Clara worked alone for the next 90 minutes, cross-referencing what she had against the freight records she was supposed to be auditing for Gibbs, because the freight records were her legitimate reason for being in this room, and she was not yet ready to give Hale any reason to look at her more carefully than he already might. She had learned in Philadelphia that the best position from which to investigate someone was one where your actual activity was invisible behind your apparent one. Her father had taught her that. He had also taught her that a ledger never lied, but the person keeping it sometimes did, and that the distance between those two facts was where every fraud in history had lived. She missed him with a specific focused ache that she had trained herself not to indulge during working hours. Ruth came back at 11 with copies of 3 additional filing notices, and together they worked through them at the table, with the recorder's log open between them. The pattern was identical in each case. A registration document dated to the early 1870s, a claimed recording error that predated the current owner's purchase, and a filing date that appeared in Hale's documents but not in the territorial recorder's log. Not one of the 4 challenged properties had a filing date that the official record supported. He used the same date gap 4 times, Clara said. She heard the disbelief in her own voice even as she kept it level. He found a period in the recorder's log that had sparse entries, and he inserted dates into that window across all 4 properties. He assumed no one would ever pull the log and compare. Nobody did, Ruth said. Until tonight. Clara looked at the 4 sets of documents laid out side by side on the table. 4 families, 4 fraudulent filing dates. One man in a padlocked room at the Continental Hotel who had done this before in Flagstaff and gotten away with it and seen no reason to change his method. He's arrogant, she said. Most men in his position are. Arrogance creates patterns. Patterns create evidence. Clara began making a master list in her clearest handwriting, the kind she used when she knew a document would eventually be read by a judge. When I get to Santa Fe, I'm going to need the original recorder's log volume, not a copied excerpt. The court will want to see the physical book. She was halfway through the list when she heard boots on the steps outside, heavier than Ruth's, faster than Gibbs's, and the door opened, and Seth Calloway walked in at 11:30 at night with his hat in his hand and a leather document tube under his arm, and the expression of a man who had ridden 8 miles in the dark because he could not make himself wait until morning. He looked at the table covered in papers and Ruth's notes and Clara's master list and said nothing for a moment. "Rode back out and got it," he said. "Couldn't sleep knowing it was out there and you were in here." "Set it down," Clara said, nodding at the table. He opened the leather tube and removed the document with the careful hands of someone handling something that mattered. The original 1871 land grant was written on heavy territorial paper, the kind that had held up to 11 years of New Mexico weather, and the handwriting was the deliberate copperplate of an official recorder who had taken his work seriously. Clara read it without touching it first, leaning over the table with her hands behind her back, the way her father had taught her to examine primary documents. Then she picked it up and read it again. "This grant is clean," she said. "The boundary description is consistent. The recording information is complete. The date and district notation match the recorder's log format for that period." She set it down. "There is nothing in this document that legitimately conflicts with your ownership. Hale's challenge is built entirely on the fraudulent 1873 registration." Calloway looked at the grant for a moment. "I've been staring at that thing for 3 weeks trying to find what was wrong with it." "Nothing is wrong with it. That's the point. The fraud isn't in your document. It's in his." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and for the first time since she'd met him 2 hours ago, the rigid set of his shoulders dropped by a fraction. Not relaxed, a man like Calloway probably didn't fully relax indoors, but something like relief moving through the tension. "3 lawyers told me I was going to lose," he said. 3 lawyers looked at Hale's filing and assumed it was legitimate because it looked legitimate. None of them compared it against the recorder's log. Clara heard the sharpness in her voice and moderated it slightly. "That is not entirely their fault. The comparison requires knowing what you're looking for." "And you knew." "I knew because the same method was used against me." She kept her voice even. My uncle chose a recording period with sparse entries, backdated a document to fit a gap, filed it confidently because confidence is half the fraud. The other half is finding people who won't look closely enough. Calloway looked at her with those direct, careful eyes. What happened to your uncle? He has my father's company. He has my father's house. She picked up her pencil. He does not have the documentation proving what he did because I took it with me when I left. You're going to use it someday. I'm going to use it when I'm in a position to use it effectively. She said it without heat. It was a fact the same as a column of numbers was a fact. Right now, I am not in that position. Right now, I am in Redemption, New Mexico, and the fraud in front of me is one I can actually do something about. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Ruth had gotten up to put water on for coffee without anyone asking her to, moving around the small room with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood when people needed something warm and didn't require thanks for providing it. The other three families, Calloway said. The Beaumonts, the Garcias, Old Man Teller. The same pattern in all four filings, Clara said. Fraudulent dates, identical method, same recording gap in the log. Something moved across his face that was harder than anger. Tom Beaumont signed away his water rights 2 weeks ago. Said he couldn't fight it. He can fight it now. Not in time to undo what he already signed necessarily. But if this goes to a territorial court, with the full documentation, any agreement signed under fraudulent pretenses can be challenged. Clara looked at him. That is not a guarantee. I want to be precise about what I can and cannot promise you. I'm not asking for guarantees, Calloway said. I'm asking for honest odds. Honest odds. If I get to Santa Fe, if the recorder's log physical volume matches the copy Ruth obtained, and if I can document the same filing date discrepancy across all four properties in the original records, then you have a case that a territorial judge cannot reasonably dismiss without explaining why the official record contradicts the filed documents. She paused. That is a strong position. It is not a certain one because Hale has demonstrated he has contacts within the land office system. We do not yet know how deep that goes. What does deep mean? It means I don't know whether the problem ends with the forged documents, or whether someone in the Santa Fe land office was involved in creating them. She kept her voice level. If the latter, obtaining the correct recorder's log, becomes considerably more complicated. The coffee Ruth set on the table between them was black and strong. Calloway wrapped both hands around the tin cup without drinking it, looking at the papers. I want to come to Santa Fe, he said. I expected you would. You're going to tell me it's not necessary. I'm going to tell you it changes the nature of the trip, Clara said. If I go alone, I am a woman reviewing records on behalf of a client, which is unremarkable. If you go with me, you are the landowner challenging Hale's filing, which makes the purpose of the visit visible to anyone watching. She looked at him. And someone will be watching. Hale has somebody in Santa Fe. Almost certainly. Then having me there is a risk. Having you there is a risk, and also potentially useful, Clara said. You can make formal requests that I cannot, because you are the property owner of record. Some documents require the owner's signature to access. And if something goes wrong, having a man present who can, she paused, choosing the word carefully, respond to situations I cannot, is not without value. Calloway looked at her for a moment, with something that might have been the beginning of a smile at the corner of his mouth. That's the most careful way anybody's ever told me I might need to hit somebody. I prefer not to plan for violence, Clara said. But I have learned to acknowledge when it is a possibility. He did almost smile then. It changed his face significantly, softened the 11 years of weather and hard work and recent sleepless weeks into something younger and more human. Clara noted it the way she noted any relevant piece of information and returned her attention to the papers. Stage leaves Saturday at 7, she said. That gives us tomorrow and Friday to prepare. I want copies of everything in this room made in duplicate before we leave. One set travels with me. One set stays with Ruth in a location Hale cannot access. She looked at Ruth. I'm assuming you have somewhere. Under the floorboards of my bedroom, Ruth said without a trace of self-consciousness. Been there since my husband's time. Nobody's looked there yet. Calloway leaned forward, elbows on the table. What do you need from me before Saturday? Bring me every piece of correspondence you've received from Hale or his lawyers since the challenge was filed. Every letter, every notice, every document they've sent you. I want to see if there are additional discrepancies in his communications that corroborate the filing date fraud. I've got a box of it at the ranch. Bring it tomorrow. I'll ride out at first light and be back by mid-morning. He stood picking up the leather document tube. He started to put the land grant back inside, then stopped and looked at Clara. Leave it with you. She understood what he was asking. It was not a small thing leaving the document that represented 11 years of his life with a woman he had known for 4 hours. She understood the weight of the offer. I'll keep it with Ruth's copy of the recorder's log, she said. Locked in Gibbs's document box. He owes me a favor. Calloway nodded and set the grant on the table. He picked up his hat. Miss Ashford. He paused at the door, not quite looking back, the line of his shoulders straight and tired. I've been trying to fight this alone for 3 weeks. Didn't know what I was fighting because I couldn't read what I was looking at. A pause. I'm obliged. Don't be obliged yet, Clara said. We haven't won anything. No, he agreed. But tonight's the first time in 3 weeks I've believed we could. He left. His boots were steady and even on the plank floor, going out different from how they'd sounded coming in. Ruth collected the coffee cups and began organizing the duplicate copies they'd need to make, moving quietly around the table, while Clara added the land grant to her master list and annotated its clean recording information against Hale's fraudulent 1873 registration. He's a good man, Ruth said, not as opinion, but as fact. He appears to be, Clara said. Hasn't been easy what he's built. Came here with nothing. Never asked for help he didn't genuinely need. Ruth folded the extra papers with practiced efficiency. Doesn't know how to stop working long enough to notice he's lonely. Clara continued writing. I'm noting that you're telling me this, she said. I imagine you are, Ruth said, and said nothing further on the subject. Outside, the sound of Calloway's horse moved through the dark toward the north road, steady and unhurried, the way the man himself moved. Clara listened to it until it faded, then looked down at her master list and the 4 sets of fraudulent documents and the recorder's log with its absent dates and the land grant of a man who had built the only thing in the world that was entirely his. She picked up her pencil and kept working. There were 2 days before the Santa Fe stage, and Marcus Hale had not yet made his next move, and the window between now and when he did was the only window they had. Clara Ashford had never once in her life let a window close on her without climbing through it first. She did not intend to start now. Wednesday came in cold and fast, the kind of morning that reminded New Mexico territory it was not yet done with October. Clara had slept 4 hours in Ruth's boarding house and was back at the relay station before Gibbs unlocked the front door, which earned her a look of grudging respect from a man not accustomed to being beaten to his own office. She spent the first hour completing his freight audit because she had been hired to do a job, and she intended to finish it, and also because the discipline of working through one problem completely before moving to the next was something her father had drilled into her from the age of 12. A half-finished ledger was worse than an unopened one. It gave the impression of knowledge without the substance of it. By 7:30, she had identified the contractor who had been systematically understating outbound freight weights, a man named Purvis, who ran a hauling operation out of a warehouse 2 streets over, and had written Gibbs a clean summary with figures precise enough to take to a magistrate. Gibbs read it with his coffee going cold beside him. "Son of a gun," he said quietly. "The discrepancy goes back to March," Clara said. "The total amounts to approximately $62 over 8 months. Whether you pursue legal remedy or simply terminate the contract is your decision, but I'd recommend terminating the contract first and pursuing remedy second. The order matters." Why's that? Because if Purvis knows you're building a legal case before you cut his access to your freight, he has time to destroy his own records. She picked up her satchel. Once his access is gone, his records are only useful to you. Gibbs looked at her over the top of the summary. You're something, Miss Ashford. I'm accurate, Clara said. Which is rarer than it should be. She was crossing Main Street toward Ruth's boarding house when she saw Marcus Hale for the first time. He was coming out of the Continental Hotel with the unhurried confidence of a man who considered the street his by rights, dressed in his city suit with his padlocked document case under one arm. He was neither the monster she had built in her mind from Ruth's description, nor the anonymous bureaucrat she had imagined from his paperwork. He was simply a man, medium height, well-fed with pleasant features, and the specific kind of easy smile that Clara had learned to recognize as the smile of someone who had never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way around. He looked at her the way men in suits looked at women carrying satchels on Main Street, briefly, categorically, and with complete absence of interest. Clara looked back at him with the same expression she used when reviewing a ledger she already knew was fraudulent. Calm, attentive, giving nothing away. He went left toward the sheriff's office. She went right toward Ruth's. She had perhaps 36 hours before he learned someone was examining his filings. Calloway arrived at the boarding house at 9:30 with a wooden box under his arm and trail dust on his boots, and the look of a man who had not slept but had made productive use of the time instead. He set the box on Ruth's kitchen table and took off the lid, and Clara looked at what was inside. 3 weeks of correspondence. Letters from Hale's lawyers in Santa Fe, official notices from the Territorial Land Office, 2 letters from the Continental Railroad's regional office in Albuquerque, and a hand-delivered note with no signature that simply read, "Take the settlement, Calloway. It won't be offered twice." She picked up the unsigned note first. When did this come? 10 days ago. Slipped under my door at the ranch. No idea who delivered it. Could have been anyone. Could have been Hale himself. Calloway's voice was flat. I used it to start my cookstove fire. You kept it, though. Figured it might matter eventually. He paused. Figured wrong about the fire part. Clara set the note aside and began working through the lawyer's letters in chronological order. She read with a pencil in her hand, marking language that was inconsistent dates, that needed cross-referencing procedural claims that required verification against territorial court rules. Calloway sat across from her and watched without speaking, which she appreciated. Most people, when they were anxious, filled silence with words that didn't help anyone. Ruth brought coffee and then removed herself to the front room with the tact of someone who understood when a conversation needed space to develop without an audience. Clara was on the 4th letter when she found it. This is wrong, she said. Calloway leaned forward. What? This letter dated October 9th cites Territorial Land Code Section 47, Paragraph 3, as the basis for voiding your 1871 grant due to the claimed recording error. She turned the letter toward him and pointed. Section 47, Paragraph 3 applies to mineral rights disputes. It has no application to grazing land ownership transfers. Whoever wrote this letter either does not know Territorial Land Code or is counting on you not knowing it. Calloway looked at the letter. I showed this to a lawyer in Mesilla. What did he say? That it looked legitimate to him and I should consider the settlement. Did he look up Section 47? A silence. He did not look up Section 47. This letter is either the product of profound incompetence or a deliberate misrepresentation of the law. Clara said it with the others she was marking. Either way, it demonstrates a pattern. Hale does not simply forge documents. He constructs an entire false legal architecture around them. Wrong code citations, fraudulent filing dates, official-looking language that is designed to be intimidating rather than accurate. She looked up. He is counting on the people he targets having no access to someone who can read what he has actually written. And most of them don't, Calloway said. No, most of them don't. She kept her voice level. You came close to being one of them. I was one of them, he said. 3 weeks ago when I first got that notice, I believed it. Thought I must have missed something when I bought the land. Thought maybe my grant really did have an error in it that I hadn't known about. His jaw tightened. Spent 2 weeks convinced I was about to lose everything because I'd been careless with paperwork 11 years ago. That's what the letters are designed to make you feel. I know that now. The feeling of being at fault when you are not is one of the most effective tools a fraudster has, Clara said. It makes people defensive instead of investigative. It makes them look inward for the problem instead of outward, at the person creating it. She heard her own voice go slightly harder on the last sentence and pulled it back to neutral. My uncle's documentation did the same thing. I spent 2 weeks convinced I had missed something in my father's original transfer paperwork before I started reading what my uncle had actually filed. Calloway was quiet for a moment. And when you started reading it, I found the same thing I found in Hale's documents. A date that didn't match an official record. A small error in a place no one was expected to look. She picked up her pencil. Fraud at this level is never bold. It's precise. It hides in the administrative gaps where people assume everything has already been verified. You sound like you've thought about this a great deal. I've had 4 months of stage travel and not much else to do. The corner of his mouth moved. Clara returned to the letters. She was building her documentation summary, a clean master record that laid the fraud out in sequential verifiable steps when the front door of Ruth's boarding house opened and Deputy Hank Drummond walked in without knocking. He was a broad man going soft around the middle somewhere in his early 40s, with a deputy's badge that caught the morning light and eyes that went immediately to the papers on the table, and then to Clara, and then to Calloway with an expression that mixed guilt and official authority in the particular uncomfortable ratio of a man doing something he knew was wrong. Calloway, he said. Drummond. Calloway's voice was even. Drummond looked at Clara. Don't believe we've met, miss. Clara Ashford, I'm auditing the relay station freight records for Mr. Gibbs. Drummond looked at the papers spread across the table, which were manifestly not freight records, and Clara looked back at him with the expression of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide, and was faintly surprised anyone might think otherwise. Heard you were in town, Drummond said to Calloway. Heard you were here at Mrs. McAllister's. He turned his hat in his hands, the same nervous gesture she'd seen in men who came to her father's office to admit they'd been keeping 2 sets of books. Mr. Hale came by the sheriff's office this morning, said he'd heard somebody was asking questions about his land filings. Land filings are public record, Clara said pleasantly. Reviewing them requires no special permission. Drummond looked at her. Mr. Hale is concerned that someone is attempting to interfere with a legitimate legal process. Then Mr. Hale should have no objection to his filings being reviewed, since legitimate documents withstand review. She kept her voice entirely courteous. Is there a law in redemption against reading public records? Deputy? A pause. Drummond knew there was not. I'm just passing along what was said, he said. I appreciate that. Clara smiled with complete sincerity. If Mr. Hale has a specific legal concern about any particular activity, he's welcome to file a complaint with the Territorial Court in Santa Fe. That is the appropriate venue for legal disputes of this nature. Drummond looked at Calloway. Seth, I'm telling you, man to man, don't make this harder than it has to be. Hale's got resources you don't. He's done this before. I know he has, Calloway said. He did it in Flagstaff 2 years ago. Something shifted in Drummond's face, a flash of something that might have been surprise, or might have been the expression of a man realizing the ground had shifted under him without his noticing. I don't know anything about Flagstaff, he said. Maybe you should look into it, Calloway said, before you decide whose side you want to be standing on when this goes to court. The 2 men looked at each other for a long moment, with the specific weight of people who have known each other long enough to remember who they used to be. I've got a family, Seth. So does Tom Beaumont. So does Garcia. So does Teller. Calloway's voice did not rise. It got quieter, which was worse. Hale went after all of them the same way he's going after me, and you rode past every one of their places without stopping." Drummond's jaw worked. He put his hat back on. "I'm just the deputy." "You're a man," Calloway said. "Act like one." Drummond left. His boots on the porch steps were heavier going out than coming in. Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway the moment the front door closed, and Clara understood that the older woman had heard every word and had positioned herself in case the conversation went a different direction. "He'll tell Hale," Clara said. "He'll tell Hale," Calloway agreed. "How much time does that give us?" "Hale will want to know exactly what we have before he moves. He's not the type to act without information." Ruth came fully into the room, drying her hands on her apron. "He'll try to find out what documents you've been looking at and what you've done with them. That buys us a day, maybe two." "We leave Saturday," Clara said. "That's 3 days." "He could try to file an injunction to prevent you accessing the Santa Fe records," Ruth said. "On what grounds?" "Interference with a legitimate legal proceeding." Clara thought about this. He'd have to file that injunction in Santa Fe himself, which means sending someone there, which means he knows we're going before we go. She looked at the papers. "Which means Drummond tells him today, he files for injunction tomorrow, and someone in Santa Fe is waiting for us when we arrive." "Or," Calloway said, "we don't wait for Saturday." Both women looked at him. "My horse is outside," he said. "The stage road to Santa Fe runs northeast. There's a relay station at Cimarron where we can get fresh horses. If we leave this afternoon, we're in Santa Fe by Friday morning, a full day ahead of anything Hale can file." Clara looked at him. "You're suggesting we ride to Santa Fe?" "I'm suggesting we stop giving Hale time to prepare for us." He met her eyes. "You said the window is what matters. Riding closes the window from our side instead of his." It was a sound strategic argument. It was also 2 days on horseback across New Mexico territory in late October, with a man she had known for less than 18 hours, which presented a category of complication that Clara filed under problems to solve rather than reasons to refuse. "I ride adequately," she said. "Not well. I'll match the pace to what you can handle. The documents need to travel securely. If anything happens to the originals..." "I've got a waterproof saddlebag I've used for deed storage before," Calloway said. "Everything fits. Everything stays dry." Clara looked at the master list she had been building since 11 o'clock the previous night. 15 hours of work organized into the clearest possible sequential documentation of Marcus Hale's fraud. She thought about Hale's face on Main Street that morning, the easy smile of a man who had never faced a consequence he couldn't outspend. She thought about the recorder's log in Santa Fe with its absent dates sitting in a shelf in the territorial office, waiting for someone who knew what they were looking for. "Ruth," she said, "I need to make 2 complete copies of everything on this table before noon." Ruth was already moving toward the writing desk in the corner. "I have paper and ink enough." "1 copy stays with you, under the floorboards." Clara began organizing the originals into sequence. "If anything prevents us from completing the Santa Fe trip, you take what you have to the nearest federal land commissioner, and you do not go through the territorial office." "Understood." Clara looked at Calloway. "We leave at 2 o'clock. That gives me time to finish the copies, collect my bag from the boarding room upstairs, and inform Gibbs that I'm completing my work for him remotely." She paused. "I assume you know the road to Santa Fe." "I've ridden it 4 times. "Then I'll defer to your judgment on route and pace." She picked up her pencil. "And Mr. Calloway." He was already at the door, reaching for his hat. "Calloway," he said. "Just Calloway. Calloway." She kept her voice businesslike. "I need you to understand something before we leave. I am going to Santa Fe to obtain a legal record that proves fraud. I am not going as your advocate or your representative. I am going as someone who has identified a crime and intends to document it properly." She looked at him directly. "I say this not to diminish your involvement, but to be precise about the nature of mine. I work better when the parameters are clear." He looked at her for a moment with those winter sky eyes that she had already learned gave nothing away, except the fact that the man behind them was paying close attention. "Understood," he said. "I'll have the horses ready at 2." He left. The door settled closed behind him, and Ruth looked at Clara across the table full of papers with an expression that was entirely too knowing for 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. "Don't," Clara said. "I haven't said a word." "You were about to." Ruth picked up her pen and dipped it in the ink. "I was about to say that we have approximately 3 hours and a great deal of copying to do," she said. "Start with the recorder's log excerpts. Those are the foundation." Clara started with the recorder's log excerpts. They worked side by side in silence for the next 2 hours. The only sounds in the room, the scratch of pens and the occasional turn of a page. And once the distant sound of a door closing hard somewhere on Main Street, that might have been nothing and might have been Marcus Hale receiving a report from his deputy and beginning to think about what to do about a woman with a satchel and a rancher with 1,200 acres and a recorder's log that was about to become the most important document in New Mexico territory. By noon, the copies were done. By 1, Clara's bag was packed and waiting by Ruth's front door. By 1:30, she had settled her account with Gibbs, who had given her an extra $2 above their agreed rate, and the kind of gruff, uncomfortable gratitude that meant more coming from him than effusive thanks would have from anyone else. At 2 o'clock precisely, Calloway brought the horses around to Ruth's front gate. Clara stood on Ruth's porch with her satchel containing the original documents and her father's ledgers and $31 and the specific, focused certainty of a woman who had spent 4 months running from a fraud she couldn't fight and had finally in the most accidental of places found one she could. Ruth took both her hands at the door. "You come back in one piece," she said. It was not a request. "I intend to," Clara said. She went down the porch steps and took the reins Calloway offered and got herself onto the horse with more determination than grace and adjusted her satchel across her lap and looked north toward the Santa Fe road. "Ready," Calloway said. "I've been ready since Philadelphia," Clara said. They rode out of Redemption at 2 in the afternoon, north toward Santa Fe, with the October sky wide and cold above them, and Marcus Hale's fraudulent documents sealed in a waterproof saddlebag between them, and everything that mattered balanced on whether they could get to the recorder's office before Hale could stop them. Behind them in the Continental Hotel on Main Street, a padlocked document case sat on a desk next to a half-written telegram addressed to the Continental Railroad's land office in Santa Fe. The race had begun. They rode hard the first 4 hours until the light went amber and the road climbed into cooler air, and Clara's back had developed an opinion about horses that she kept to herself because complaining about physical discomfort was not going to get them to Santa Fe any faster. Calloway set a pace that was demanding without being punishing, which she recognized as a deliberate choice on his part and appreciated without saying so. He checked on her twice in the first 2 hours, once at a creek crossing where the footing was uncertain, and once when her horse shied at something in the scrub brush, and both times he did it with the efficiency of someone addressing a practical problem rather than doubting her capability. The distinction mattered. They stopped at dusk at the Cimarron relay station, a small operation run by a leathery man named Cord, who knew Calloway by name and produced food and fresh horses without being asked more than once. Clara ate standing at the hitching rail because sitting down felt like a commitment to stopping, and she was not yet ready to stop. "You ride better than you said." Calloway told her, coming to stand beside her with his own plate. "I ride adequately," she said, "which is what I told you." Adequately was modest. Accuracy is not modesty. I told you the precise truth about my skill level, so you could make an informed decision about pace and route. She ate another bite. If I had overstated my ability and slowed us down, that would have been a problem. Understating it costs nothing. He looked at her with that considering expression she was learning to read as his version of being interested in something. You do that with everything. Give the conservative estimate first. My father taught me that the person who promises exactly what they can deliver is worth 10 times the person who promises what sounds impressive. She set down the empty plate. He was right about most things. What was he wrong about? The question was direct enough that it deserved consideration rather than deflection. He believed that honest work and documented evidence would always be sufficient to protect what was rightfully yours, Clara said. He believed systems worked the way they were designed to work. She picked up the water canteen. He never accounted for the possibility that the people running the systems might decide the rules applied to everyone except themselves. Calloway was quiet for a moment. My father believed the same thing. Came west in '58 with a land warrant from the government and lost it inside 2 years to a speculator who knew the right people in the territorial office. He looked north toward the dark road ahead. I bought my land instead of claiming it. Paid cash for every acre, got every signature witnessed, kept every record in a fireproof box. A pause. Still wasn't enough to stop Hale from filing against it. It was enough to give us what we needed to fight back, Clara said. The 1871 grant is clean. That is because you were careful. If the original documentation had problems, we would have had nowhere to stand. Never thought about it that way. Most people don't. They think careful record-keeping is bureaucratic tedium. It is actually the only reliable defense against the people who use bureaucratic systems as weapons. She handed him the canteen. Your father lost his land because someone exploited a gap in the official record. You kept your land so far because you closed every gap in yours. That is not luck. That is methodology. Calloway took the canteen and looked at her with something that had moved beyond considering into something quieter and more direct. You think about everything like it's a problem to be solved. I think about everything like it's a set of numbers that either balance or don't, Clara said. Most situations in life have a correct answer if you're willing to do the arithmetic honestly. And people... She picked up her satchel and checked the document case was still secure. People are harder than numbers, she admitted. Numbers don't have agendas. They rode through the night in 3-hour stretches with short rests, trading the lead on the road, so each could manage their own pace through the dark sections. Clara learned that Calloway navigated by stars and road texture, and the behavior of his horse with the same unconscious competence she used to navigate a complicated ledger, not by thinking about each step, but by having internalized the system so thoroughly that deviations registered as feeling wrong before they registered as looking wrong. She found herself watching him work without meaning to. Around 2 a.m, during a rest stop at a dry creek bed, he asked her something she hadn't expected. The man in Santa Fe. Whitfield. Did you want it to work out? Clara was quiet for a moment. The honest answer required more self-examination than she usually permitted during working hours. But they were not technically working at 2 a.m. in the middle of the New Mexico desert, and the question had been asked with enough genuine curiosity that dismissing it felt like a small dishonesty. I wanted a solution, she said finally. I wanted the problem of having no income, no home, and no standing in Philadelphia to be solved in a way that was legal and respectable, and didn't require me to start entirely from nothing. She looked at the stars, which were extravagant out here, in a way that Philadelphia had never permitted. Whether I wanted Whitfield specifically, I cannot say, because I never met him. I wanted what he represented, which is different. Security. Independence, she corrected. Security through my own means was what I'd had before my uncle took it. What Whitfield offered was security through someone else's means, which is a lesser version of the same thing, but it was what was available. And now I am riding to Santa Fe to expose a fraud, and when that is done, I will need to determine what comes next. She said it without self-pity, because self-pity was not useful. I have $31 marketable skills, and the documentation proving my uncle's fraud, which I cannot yet use but intend to. She paused. That is more than some people start with. It's more than I started with, Calloway said. I had $22 and a saddle when I came to New Mexico. She looked at him. 11 years ago. 11 years ago. And you built 1,200 acres from that. And a house, a barn, a water system, and a herd that's currently being watched by my neighbor's boy, who is 17 and responsible enough that I trust him with it, but not so old that I'm not slightly worried. The corner of his mouth moved. I've been worried about that boy and my cattle since Tuesday, and I haven't had a spare moment to think about it, which is either a sign of how serious this situation is or how good this company is. Possibly both. Clara felt warmth move through her chest that was not related to the night air and decided not to examine it too closely at 2 a.m. on a road to Santa Fe. Your cattle are fine, she said. You don't know that. No, but worrying about it will not make them more fine, and the work in front of us requires your full attention. She picked up her reins. Shall we keep moving? They reached the outskirts of Santa Fe at 7:30. Friday morning, road dirty and stiff, and running on the particular fuel of people who have a specific task to complete before they can afford to be tired. Calloway knew a boarding house near the plaza run by a woman named Senora Vega, who asked no questions beyond whether you needed 1 room or 2 and whether you preferred your eggs cooked or not. Clara said 2 rooms, please, and put her satchel on the narrow bed in hers, and opened it and checked that every document was in order, and then washed her face with the basin water and pinned her hair back and was ready to leave in 11 minutes. Calloway was waiting in the hallway, looking marginally less trail-worn than he had any right to be. Territorial Recorder's office opens at 8, he said. Then we have 20 minutes. I need to know who the recorder is and whether he has any known connection to the Continental Railroad before we walk in. How do we find that out in 20 minutes? Senora Vega, Clara said. Women who run boarding houses near government offices know everyone who works in them. Ask her. He looked at her for a half second. Then he went downstairs. He was back in 4 minutes. Recorder's name is Howard Tate. Been in the position 8 years. Senora Vega says he's thorough, doesn't drink, and has a wife who is president of the Ladies' Auxiliary at the church on Ortiz Street. He paused. She also says a man from the Continental Railroad came into the office twice last week, asking about filing procedures for land claim challenges in the southern districts. Clara put on her jacket. Then Hale telegraphed ahead. Looks that way. Which means Tate may have been primed to expect a challenge to his filings, and may have been given a version of events that positions us as the fraudulent party. She picked up her satchel. We need to get in front of him before anyone from the railroad's local office does. It's 7:42. Then let's walk quickly. The Territorial Recorder's office occupied the ground floor of a stone building 2 blocks from the plaza, and Howard Tate was already at his desk when Clara pushed open the door at 3 minutes before 8, which told her he was the kind of man who arrived early and took his position seriously. Both were good signs. He was in his 50s, compact and precise-looking, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the specific wariness of a government official who had learned that people arriving early were either very organized or very desperate. We're not open yet, he said. We're here on a time-sensitive matter involving potentially fraudulent land filings in the Redemption District, Clara said, setting her satchel on the counter and beginning to remove documents with the efficient calm of someone who had been rehearsing this moment since Tuesday night. I am Clara Ashford, transit accountant, formerly of Ashford Transport in Philadelphia. This is Seth Calloway, owner of record of the Copper Ridge Ranch in the Redemption District land grant dated 1871. She placed the land grant on the counter. And this is a copy of your office's own recorder's log for March 1873, which I would like to compare against an original registration document that was filed in the Redemption District 6 weeks ago by a Continental Railroad land agent named Marcus Hale. Tate looked at the documents. He looked at Clara. He looked at Calloway. Sit down, he said. Which was? Clara reflected, becoming her favorite response to hear from people in positions of authority. They sat. Tate picked up the land grant, first examined it for 2 minutes without speaking, then set it down, and picked up the copy of the recorder's log. Clara placed Hale's registration document beside it, and pointed to the filing date without speaking. Tate looked at the registration. He looked at the log. He looked at the registration again. He removed his reading glasses from his forehead and put them on. March 14th, 1873, he said. Yes. This district. Yes. He turned to a cabinet behind his desk, opened it, and began moving along a row of labeled volumes with his finger. He pulled a thick bound volume and set it on the desk and opened it to March 1873 and ran his finger down the entries with the focused attention of a man who understood exactly what he was looking for. He stopped. He went back. He read the surrounding entries. He looked up at Clara. There is no entry for this district on March 14th, he said. No, Clara said. There is not. A silence. Outside the plaza was beginning its morning activity, boots on stone, a cartwheel, someone calling a name in Spanish. Inside the recorder's office, the silence had the quality of something important being understood. How many properties has Hale filed against in the Redemption District? Tate asked. 4 confirmed challenges, possibly more in adjacent districts. Clara placed the 4 filing notices on the counter in sequence. Each one cites a registration document with a filing date that does not appear in your office's log. I have copies of all 4 dates marked against the relevant log pages. Tate looked at the 4 notices laid out in a row. He looked at them the way Clara looked at a ledger that had just revealed something it wasn't supposed to reveal, with the expression of someone whose understanding of a situation had just been permanently revised. Who else knows about this? He said. My colleague Ruth McAllister in Redemption holds copies of all documents. She has been instructed to take them to a federal land commissioner if we do not return within 7 days. Clara kept her voice level. I mention this not as a threat, but as a practical information point. The documentation exists in multiple locations. Tate looked at her for a long moment. You're very thorough, Miss Ashford. I'm accurate, she said, which the situation requires. He stood and went to the cabinet again and began pulling additional volumes. I'm going to need the rest of the morning to verify the other 3 filing dates against the original logs. He set 2 more volumes on his desk. Mr. Calloway, your 1871 grant is clean. I can tell you that much immediately. The boundary description and recording information are consistent with our records for that period. He looked at Clara. What you've brought me, if it holds up across all 4 properties, constitutes evidence of systematic document fraud committed against this office. I believe it will hold up, Clara said. I have not made claims I cannot support with the arithmetic. I believe you. He said it simply without condescension. The statement of a man evaluating evidence and finding it sound. I'm going to need you both to provide formal depositions. This will become a matter for the Territorial Attorney General's office, not just the land recording system. We understand. It may also become complicated. Tate's voice dropped slightly. I am aware that a representative of the Continental Railroad visited this office last week. I did not find the visit suspicious at the time. I find it more suspicious now. He looked at his volumes of log records. I will tell you honestly that I don't yet know the full extent of what I'm looking at, and I don't intend to make claims I can't support either. That is exactly the right approach, Clara said. Something shifted in Tate's expression. Where did you say you were from? Philadelphia. And you ended up in Redemption. How exactly? Wrong train, Calloway said from beside her. Clara looked at him. He was looking at Tate with a perfectly straight face, but there was something in the set of his jaw that she recognized now as the expression he wore when he was quietly amused about something. Wrong stage technically, Clara said. Glad it went wrong, Calloway said. He said it quietly, not to Tate, and not quite to her, more the way a man says something he has been thinking for a while, and has simply decided to stop not saying. His eyes were on the recorder's log open on the desk in front of them, and he did not look at her when he said it, which somehow made it heavier than if he had. Clara kept her eyes on the documents. She was aware of warmth moving up into her face and was grateful for the dim light in the recorder's office. "The depositions," she said to Tate. "We can provide those this morning. My clerk arrives at 8:30. She'll take them down." Tate was already deep in the second volume of log records, his finger moving carefully down the March 1873 entries. He stopped. He went back 2 pages. His expression tightened in the specific way of a man who has just found confirmation of something he hoped he wouldn't find. "Second property," he said. "Garcia family. Filing date listed as March 14th, 1873. He looked up. "Same date, same district, not in this log." "No," Clara said. "It would not be." Tate closed the volume carefully, the way a person closes something that has become evidence. He looked at the row of filing notices on his counter. He looked at Clara. He looked at Calloway. "Mr. Calloway," he said. "How long have you been fighting this claim?" 3 weeks, Calloway said. Tate picked up the filing notices one more time, the 4 of them in a row, each one representing a family in redemption who had received a document designed to look like law and feel like inevitability. He set them down. "We're going to fix this," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of professional intent from a man who understood that his office had been used as an instrument of fraud and was now deciding what to do about that. "Yes," Clara said. "We are." Outside the window, Santa Fe went about its morning entirely unaware that in a stone building 2 blocks from the plaza, a recorder's log was open to March 1873. And the neat, deliberate absence of 4 filing dates was about to become the foundation of the most significant land fraud case the New Mexico Territory had seen in a decade. Marcus Hale's telegram had arrived in Santa Fe the previous evening. Whatever instructions it contained, they were now irrelevant because the woman he had dismissed on Main Street as someone else's problem had arrived a full day before his own representative and had placed the arithmetic of his fraud directly in front of the one man in New Mexico Territory with both the authority and the professional outrage to do something about it. Calloway sat beside her at the counter while Tate's clerk took their depositions, and at one point his hand rested briefly on the counter beside hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it, and neither of them moved away. There was work left to do. There were depositions to give and log volumes to verify, and an attorney general's office to contact, and a case to build that was strong enough to survive whatever resources Marcus Hale was about to bring against it. There were complications Clara hadn't yet identified, and problems she hadn't yet solved. But the recorder's log was open. The absent dates were documented, and the man sitting beside her had spent 11 years building something worth fighting for and had found in the most accidental of places someone who knew exactly how to fight for it. The arithmetic for the first time in 4 months was beginning to balance. The depositions took 3 hours. Tate's clerk was a young woman named Adela, who wrote in a precise, rapid hand and asked clarifying questions without apology, which Clara respected. Calloway gave his deposition. First, the timeline of Hale's challenge, every letter received. Every lawyer consulted every day of the 3 weeks he had spent trying to understand a fraud, designed specifically to be incomprehensible to the person it targeted. He spoke without embellishment and without self-pity, which made his account more devastating than any amount of emotional elaboration would have. Clara gave hers second. She laid out the methodology of the fraud in sequential order: the false filing dates, the misapplied legal code citations, the pattern matching the Flagstaff operation from 2 years prior, the systematic targeting of properties along the railroad's planned expansion route. She spoke the way she wrote a ledger summary, every claim sourced, every conclusion supported by the specific document that generated it. When she finished, Adela looked up from her notes with an expression that was not entirely professional. "All 4 properties," Adela said. "Same method." Same method, same date range, same recording gap exploited. Clara kept her voice even. "The person who designed this, knew the territorial recording system well enough to identify a period of sparse entries and use it consistently across multiple filings. That level of knowledge either comes from long experience with territorial land records or from access to someone inside this office. Tate, who had been working through log volumes at his desk throughout both depositions, looked up at that. "I have been in this position for 8 years," he said. "I have 2 clerks. Adela has been here 4 years. The other clerk, a man named Prescott, has been here 14 months. "When did Prescott start?" Clara asked. Tate was very still for a moment. "October of last year," he said. 14 months ago. "And the Flagstaff operation concluded approximately 14 months ago," Clara said. The silence in the room had a particular weight to it. Tate removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk with the careful deliberateness of a man buying himself a moment to think through an implication he did not want to rush. "Prescott is not here today," Tate said. "He sent word yesterday morning that he was unwell." "The same day Hale's telegram arrived from Redemption," Calloway said. Tate stood. He went to the filing cabinet and opened the bottom drawer and removed a personnel file and read it for 2 minutes without speaking. Then he closed it and returned it to the drawer and closed the drawer and turned around. "I need to contact the Territorial Attorney General's office this morning," he said. "Before Prescott returns, before the railroad's representative in Santa Fe has time to prepare a response, and before anyone else in this building has the opportunity to access the original log volumes." He looked at Clara. "I'm going to ask you to remain in this office while I do that. I do not want these documents out of my sight or yours until someone with prosecutorial authority has reviewed them." "Agreed," Clara said. He looked at Calloway. "Mr. Calloway, your land grant is valid. I am prepared to issue a formal certification of that validity today, which constitutes an official recorder's finding that supersedes any challenge based on the disputed 1873 registration." He said it directly without preamble. "You are not going to lose your ranch." Calloway said nothing for a moment. Clara watched something move across his face that was not relief. Exactly. Relief was too simple a word for what happened to a man who had spent 3 weeks carrying the specific weight of almost losing the only thing in the world that was entirely his. It was more like the thing that happens when a weight that has become so familiar, you stopped noticing it is finally set down, and the absence of it is almost as disorienting as the presence had been. "Much obliged," he said. His voice was entirely steady and told her nothing except that she had learned enough about how he spoke to know that entirely steady was how he sounded when something mattered very much. Tate left for the Attorney General's office at 10:30 with a leather case containing copies of every document Clara had brought from Redemption, plus his own annotated log volumes. He was back at noon with a man named Garrett, the Deputy Territorial Attorney General, who was in his 40s, impatient in the way of someone perpetually aware of how much work existed in the world, and who read through Clara's documentation summary in 11 minutes without looking up once. "You built this in 3 days," he said when he finished. 2 days and 1 night, Clara said. The foundational discrepancy took approximately 30 minutes to identify. The comprehensive documentation took longer. Garrett looked at her over the papers. "What's your stake in this?" "None financial. I arrived in Redemption by accident and identified a fraud I have specific prior experience recognizing." She kept her voice precise. "My stake is that Marcus Hale has done this before in Flagstaff and was not prosecuted and came to Redemption and did it again with the confidence of someone who has never faced a consequence. My stake is that the 4 families he targeted in Redemption have done nothing wrong except own land the railroad wants, and at least 3 of them have already suffered losses they should not have suffered." She paused. "And my stake is that the same method was used against me 4 months ago in Philadelphia, and I was not in a position to stop it there. I am in a position to stop it here." Garrett was quiet for a moment. He looked at Calloway. "You the rancher?" "Yes." 1,200 acres, 1871 grant clean documentation." "That's right." Garrett looked at the 4 filing notices in a row on the counter. We're going to need the other 3 property owners to provide depositions as well. And we're going to need to move quickly because the moment Hale's railroad contacts in this city understand what's happening there, will be legal pressure applied from directions I can't fully predict. He looked at Clara. Can you get the other families to Santa Fe? Getting them here would take time they may not have, Clara said. But their documentation is held by Ruth McAllister in Redemption, who is entirely competent to facilitate depositions if you send a representative with territorial authority to take them on site. I can have someone in Redemption by Sunday. Then I would suggest sending someone before Sunday, Clara said. Hale is still in Redemption. He knows his filings are being challenged, but he does not yet know the extent of what we have. Once he understands the recorder's log evidence, he will begin managing his exposure, which may include approaching the remaining property owners with settlement offers designed to complicate subsequent prosecution. Garrett looked at her steadily. You've done this before. I've watched it done to people I cared about and been unable to prevent it, Clara said. The sequence is always the same. Identify document move before the other party can contain the damage. The order matters more than almost anything else. All right. Garrett straightened the papers into a stack. I'm issuing an emergency hold on all 4 challenged properties effective immediately, which means no further legal action on Hale's challenges can proceed while the investigation is active. He looked at Tate. I want Prescott detained and interviewed before end of business today. Do not let him access those log volumes. Understood, Tate said. And I want a warrant for Hale issued by tomorrow morning. Garrett picked up his case. Miss Ashford, I'm going to need you available for the next several days for follow-up questions. I can stay in Santa Fe through the middle of next week, Clara said. Good. He moved toward the door, then stopped. This is solid work. I want you to know that. I've seen fraud cases built by lawyers with 3 months and a full staff that were less coherent than what you've put together here. He said it without flattery, the way a professional acknowledges another professional's competence. It'll make a difference. He left. The office was quiet. Tate went back to his log volumes with the focused attention of a man who had discovered a problem in his own records and intended to understand its full extent before he stopped for the day. Clara stood at the counter with the copy of her documentation summary still in her hands, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the morning she left Philadelphia. Not triumph, the case was not yet complete, and she had learned enough about legal proceedings to know that complete was a long road from started. But something like the solid satisfaction of work that had been done correctly, built on accurate foundations, documented in a way that would hold. She had been running for 4 months, not toward anything away from her uncle's fraud, away from the gutted shell of everything her father had built away from Philadelphia, and its particular cruelty of being surrounded by the life she'd lost while being denied any part of it. She had signed a matrimonial contract because it pointed her in a direction, any direction, and movement had felt necessary when staying still felt like drowning. She had not expected to find in the wrong stage stop in New Mexico territory a fraud she recognized and a fight she could actually win. She had not expected to find Seth Calloway. That thought arrived with more force than she intended to give it, and she put it in the category of things to examine later when the work was done, which was where she put most things that threatened to be larger than she had time for. She was putting her copy of the documentation back in her satchel when Calloway appeared at her elbow. "Come on," he said. "Come on, where Garrett may need. Garrett knows where to find us. Tate has everything he needs." He picked up her satchel from the counter and handed it to her. "You haven't eaten since last night, and neither have I, and there's a place near the plaza that makes the best green chili in the territory, and I have been thinking about it for approximately the last 40 miles. Clara looked at him. "We should stay available." "We are available. We'll be 2 blocks away eating lunch like people instead of depositions." He was already at the door, holding it open, with the particular patient courtesy of a man who had decided something and was prepared to wait for the other person to catch up. "You solved it, Clara. Let yourself know that for 10 minutes before you start worrying about what's next." It was the first time he had used her first name. She was fairly certain he hadn't planned it. She picked up her satchel and walked through the door. The restaurant near the plaza was small and warm, and smelled of roasting chiles and wood smoke, and Calloway ordered for both of them in Spanish without consulting her, which she would have objected to, except that the food that arrived was extraordinary, and objecting to it would have required stopping eating, which she was not prepared to do. They ate in silence for several minutes. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling, and Clara had learned enough about Calloway in the past 3 days to know that this was how he expressed a particular kind of ease, not by talking more, but by talking less, by letting the quiet exist between people without apologizing for it. "What happens to you now?" he said. "Not you both. You." Clara set down her fork. It was the question she had been circling for 3 days, the question underneath all the work, the one that the work had been partly a means of not examining too directly. "I'm not sure," she said. And then, because he had been honest with her, in ways that had cost him something, she gave him more of the truth than she usually offered. "I was going to Santa Fe to meet a man I'd never met and build a life from a contract. That option no longer exists. I have skills that are marketable documentation of my uncle's fraud that I cannot yet deploy effectively, and $31. She picked up her fork again. "And I find that I am less frightened by that than I expected to be." "Why less frightened?" "Because 3 days ago I sat in a relay station back room and identified a fraud from documents I'd never seen before in a territory I'd never visited, and by the following morning I had a case built well enough that the Deputy Territorial Attorney General called it solid work." She looked at him steadily. "I have spent 4 months believing that my skills were insufficient to protect me in the world. I no longer believe that." Calloway was quiet for a moment. "Redemption needs someone who can read numbers honestly," he said. "Gibbs knows it. Half the businesses on Main Street know it. Tom Beaumont almost signed away his water rights because he couldn't read a contract clearly enough to know what it said." He kept his voice even informational, the same way she kept her voice informational when she was saying something that mattered. "There's a living in it for someone willing to do the work." "Are you suggesting I set up a practice in redemption?" "I'm suggesting that the town you accidentally arrived in 3 days ago needs exactly the skill set you happen to possess, and that in my experience, when two things fit together, that precisely it's worth paying attention to." He looked at her. "I'm also suggesting it because I would like you to stay. But I said I'd tell you the practical reasons first, and the personal ones second, and that's me telling you the practical ones." Clara looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at him, at the 11 years of weather and work in his face, and the careful winter sky eyes that gave nothing away, except that the man behind them was paying close attention, and had been paying close attention to her specifically since the moment he walked into Gibbs's back room, and found her with his fraudulent documents spread across the table. "What are the personal ones?" she said. He picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. The small, deliberate movement of a man who did not do anything carelessly. "I told you the ranch is the only thing in the world that's entirely mine," he said. "That's been true for 11 years. I built it that way on purpose because everything I'd watched other people build on somebody else's foundation eventually got taken from them, and I decided I'd rather have something small and solid than something large and borrowed." He paused. 3 days ago, you sat across from me and told me my land grant was clean and my documents were sound, and that what I'd built for 11 years was worth fighting for. And then you fought for it. He looked at her directly. "I'd like the opportunity to do the same for you someday, for whatever you decide to build next." The room was quiet around them. At the next table, a man was reading a newspaper with complete absorption. Outside the plaza was doing its Friday business, unhurried and unconcerned with what was happening in a small restaurant 2 blocks from the territorial recorder's office. "That's a considerable offer," Clara said, "from someone I've known 3 days." "It is," he agreed. "I'm aware of that." "I am not easy to know," she said. I have been told this more than once. I think about things like problems to be solved. I keep the conservative estimate. I find it difficult to accept help without turning it into a transaction. She looked at him. I am also apparently the kind of woman who rides 40 miles overnight to expose a fraud that was not technically her business, which suggests I do not always behave as practically as I intend to. No, he said. You don't. And there was the almost smile again, the one that changed his face entirely. I find I don't mind it. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Philadelphia, about her father's oak desk, and the ledgers lined up by year, and the smell of ink, and the specific satisfaction of a column that balanced to the last cent. She thought about her uncle, in that chair now behind that desk, with fraudulent documents she had left behind, because fighting them alone had been a fight she couldn't win. She thought about the testimony she had given this morning, and the recorder's log open on Tate's desk, and Garrett's voice saying, "This is solid work," and meaning it. She thought about what it felt like to ride into a town by accident and find something worth staying for. I'll stay through the Attorney General's process, she said, until Hale is dealt with and the other 3 families have their documentation challenge complete. She kept her voice measured. After that, I'll evaluate what redemption needs and whether my skills are the right fit for it. That's reasonable, Calloway said. It's cautious. That too. He looked at her steadily. I can work with cautious. And the other thing, she said. What you said earlier. The personal reasons. Yes. I'm not dismissing them. She met his eyes. I want you to know that. I'm not evaluating them yet because I am not yet in a position to evaluate them accurately, but I'm not dismissing them. Something settled in his expression. Not satisfaction, something quieter. The look of a man who had asked a question he expected might go unanswered, and found instead that it had simply been deferred, which was a different thing entirely. That's enough for me, he said. For now. They were back at the recorder's office by 2 o'clock. Tate had spent the morning working through every land filing from the southern districts for the past 14 months, and had identified 7 additional instances of the same fraudulent dating method. Not all of them challenged, yet some of them sitting in the system, waiting to be activated when the railroad needed the land they covered. Prescott had been detained by the sheriff's office at noon, and had, according to Tate, begun cooperating with investigators within the first hour, which was the behavior of a man who had understood too late that he had been a tool rather than a partner in what Hale had built. Marcus Hale was arrested in redemption on Saturday morning. Ruth McAllister sent a telegram that arrived at Senora Vega's boarding house before Clara and Calloway had finished their coffee. It read in Ruth's characteristic economy of language, Hale in custody. Drummond resigned. Tom Beaumont is crying and I told him to stop. Come home when you're ready. Clara read it twice. Then she read it again because of the last 2 words which were doing more work than their size suggested. Come home. She handed it to Calloway without saying anything. He read it and handed it back and looked at her with an expression that asked a question without the words. When do you want to leave? She said. Tomorrow morning if you're ready. He paused. Unless you need more time in Santa Fe. Garrett has everything he needs from me for now. He knows where to find me. She folded the telegram and put it in her satchel. I'd like to see Ruth. So would I. They left Santa Fe the next morning on the stage because Clara's back had provided extensive feedback on the subject of another 40 miles on horseback, and she had decided that discretion was the better part of horsemanship. Calloway surrendered his horse to the relay station at Cimarron and paid for both stage tickets without mentioning it, which Clara noticed and chose not to contest, which told her something about how she had changed in 5 days that she filed for later examination. The ride back was slower than the ride out, which gave time for things that the urgency of the outbound journey had not permitted. Conversation that wasn't about documents or strategy or the next step in the legal process. The kind of conversation that happens when two people have been through something together and are only now in the aftermath, finding out who the other person actually is when the emergency is done. She learned that Calloway had taught himself to read at 17 from a Bible and a surveying manual, which accounted for his particular precision with language. That he had one recurring regret, which was not being in Tombstone when his brother Daniel went into the mine the last time. That he made decent coffee and poor biscuits and had accepted both facts about himself without apparent distress. That he had not been to church in 4 years, but still believed in something he couldn't name, precisely which he described as the feeling that things tended to work out the way they were supposed to work out if you did your part and paid attention. She told him about her father. Really told him not the summary version she gave people who needed background information, but the actual version, the one about the man who had let her sit at his accounting desk from the age of 9, and treated her questions about the ledgers as serious inquiries from a serious person at a time when no one else did. She told him about the morning she had found her uncle's fraudulent documentation and had sat very still for a long time with the papers in her lap, understanding that the fight was already lost, and that knowing you were right was not the same thing as having the power to prove it to the people who mattered. Calloway listened the way he did everything with his full attention and without interrupting. "You're going to get it back," he said when she finished. "Your father's company. The documentation you have will eventually be usable." "Eventually," she said. "You've got time." "I know." She looked out the stage window at the New Mexico road going by red earth and scrub brush, and the distant mountains doing what they always did, which was exist at a scale that put human difficulties in proportion without diminishing them. "I used to think that rebuilding everything from nothing was a failure. Evidence that I had not been sufficient to protect what I was supposed to protect." She paused. "I don't think that anymore." "What do you think now?" "I think that the things worth building require being built twice sometimes. Once because you don't know yet what they should be, and once because now you do." She looked at him. "The second version is always better than the first." He looked at her with those steady winter sky eyes for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I reckon that's right." Redemption came into view in the late afternoon, the same dusty main street and low buildings and distant mountains she had arrived to 5 days ago, on a stage going the wrong direction with $31 and a telegram that said her last option had been voided. It looked different now. Not changed. She had not changed the town, not yet, not in 5 days. But her relationship to it had changed the way a place changes when you stop passing through it and start being in it. Ruth was on her boarding house porch when the stage pulled in, and she came down the steps with the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of a woman who had been waiting but would not be making a performance of it. She took Clara's hands and squeezed them once and said, "You did well," which from Ruth McAllister was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "We did well," Clara said. "Don't be modest. I made copies and kept them under a floorboard. You rode to Santa Fe and dismantled a land fraud operation in 4 days." Ruth released her hands and looked at Calloway. "Your cattle are fine. The Morrison boy has been conscientious." "I'll ride out tomorrow," Calloway said. "You'll have supper here first." Ruth's tone indicated this was not a question. "Both of you. I made the chicken stew." Tom Beaumont came to the boarding house that evening. He was a lean, weathered man in his 50s, who sat at Ruth's kitchen table and kept his hat in his hands, and had the look of someone who had been through a hard season and was only now beginning to believe the weather might change. He thanked Clara with a directness that was clearly not his habitual mode and cost him something to produce, which made it worth considerably more than easier thanks would have been. "My water rights," he said. "The agreement I signed." "The emergency hold on Hale's challenges covers the properties he was actively pursuing," Clara said. "Your agreement was signed under fraudulent pretenses, which gives you grounds to challenge it in territorial court. Garrett's office will be in contact." She looked at him steadily. "You will need a lawyer for that portion, but you will have the documentation to support the challenge." "I can't afford a lawyer in Las Cruces." You won't need one in Las Cruces. Clara kept her voice even. Garrett's office has jurisdiction. Their representation is at no cost to the affected property owners. She paused. You should also know that what happened to you happened to 3 other families in this territory, and to at least 4 in Flagstaff before that. The pattern of the fraud and the documentation supporting it are both substantial. Your case is not isolated, and it is not weak. Tom Beaumont looked at her for a long moment. How'd you know to look at the recorder's log? Because the same method was used against me, Clara said. And because someone had taught me that when the numbers don't agree, you don't assume the official record is wrong. He nodded slowly. He put his hat back on. Miss Ashford, he said at the door. I've been running cattle in this territory for 22 years, seen a lot of people come through redemption. Most of them were passing through to somewhere else. He looked at her with the direct evaluating gaze of a man who judged people by what they did when it cost them something. Hope you're not one of those. He left. Ruth cleared the supper dishes with the quiet efficiency of someone giving 2 people the room to say what needed saying. Calloway walked Clara to the front door of the boarding house as the evening settled fully over redemption, and the first stars appeared above the high desert in their unhurried extravagance. He stood on the porch step, and she stood in the doorway, and the distance between them was small enough that the conversation could be quiet. I meant what I said in Santa Fe, he said. I know you did. And what you said, that you're not dismissing it. I meant that too. He looked at her with those careful eyes that had been paying attention since the first night she'd placed his fraudulent documents on a table and told him to sit down. Then I'll be patient, he said. I'm good at patient when something's worth it. You may find I require considerable patience, Clara said. Reckon I've had practice. She looked at him standing in the October dark with 11 years of built things behind him and the specific steadiness of a man who had decided what mattered and arranged his life accordingly. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had found in the accidental 5 days of a wrong stage stop in a town called Redemption. Good night, Calloway, she said. Good night, Clara. She went inside. She sat on the edge of her bed in Ruth's boarding house, with her satchel on the floor beside her, and her father's ledgers on the nightstand, and the documentation of Marcus Hale's fraud safely in the hands of people with the authority and the will to act on it. She thought about Tom Beaumont's water rights, and the Garcia family, and the Teller property, and the 4 families in Flagstaff, who had lost what they'd built to the same man, using the same method, and had never gotten it back. She thought about Prescott in a Santa Fe office, choosing to participate in something he knew was wrong because the money was there and the risk seemed manageable. She thought about her uncle in Philadelphia, in her father's chair behind her father's desk, with fraudulent documents she had not yet been able to fight. She thought about the second version always being better than the first. She picked up her father's account ledger, the one she had carried from Philadelphia in the bottom of her satchel, and opened it to the last page he had written in the final column of figures, in his careful hand, balanced to the last cent, the way he had always kept them. She ran her finger along the numbers and thought about all the things he had believed about honest work and sound documentation and the reliability of systems, and about which parts of that he had been right about and which parts the world had disproven. He had been right about the documentation. He had been right about the methodology. He had been right that a ledger never lies, even when the person keeping it does. He had been wrong that the systems would protect you. The systems were built by people, and people could be bought, and the only reliable protection was knowing how to read what was actually in front of you, rather than what you were told was there. She had learned that from watching him be wrong about it. Which meant she had learned it from him after all, just not in the way either of them had expected. Clara Ashford closed the ledger and set it on the nightstand beside her father's name written on the cover, and looked at the window where the New Mexico night was doing what it always did, vast and cold, and entirely indifferent to the small human concerns taking place beneath it, and understood with the clarity that comes at the end of the kind of week that changes the shape of everything, that she was not passing through redemption. She was here, She had work to do, and people worth doing it for, and a man on a ranch 8 miles north who had built 1,200 acres from $22 and a saddle, and had looked at her from the beginning not as a woman to be managed, but as a person to be reckoned with. She had come west running from a fraud she couldn't fight. She had arrived in the wrong town on the wrong day, with $31 and a satchel full of her father's ledgers, and the specific focused fury of a woman who knew exactly what had been taken from her and exactly who had taken it. She had found in the most accidental of places a fraud she could fight a community that needed what she knew how to give, and the beginning of something she did not yet have a word for, but recognized the shape of something worth building solid at the foundation, built on accurate numbers and honest work, and the particular kind of trust that is earned through action rather than promised through contracts. The wrong stage had brought her here. Everything after that had been her own choosing, and that Clara Ashford decided, looking at her father's ledger in the New Mexico dark, with the whole of her uncertain and promising future laid out before her like a column of figures waiting to be worked, that was exactly how it was supposed to be.